Whoa, very interesting Nintendo Switch 2 news drops ahead of launch. Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we have much to discuss surrounding Nintendo and the Switch 2. I'm recording this video just 3 days away from the launch of Nintendo Switch 2. These are exciting times. We are so close to the beginning of Nintendo's next generation. But the news keeps coming out about Nintendo and the Switch 2. Just yesterday, it hasn't even been 24 hours, last night or last evening, we got a report from Bloomberg about Nintendo and the Switch 2 in Japan that has some very implicative things here, and Nintendo has fired back immediately, which is something rare to see, very rare to see, and so this alone is a very interesting story. But we have much more to discuss today. We have even more footage that has dropped about a few different games from the Nintendo Today app, including Mario Kart World, and there's something there that I saw that is not something I have seen before, which I want to talk about today. But even beyond that, we have a new rumor about a Microsoft title coming to Switch 2. We have some confirmations, we have an update on the story regarding the Princess Zelda actress for the live-action movie, and a very positive interview from CD Projekt Red about the development process for Nintendo Switch 2. There's a decent amount to get into today. But before going forward, let me take this moment to point out, I am aiming for a new goal of 60,000 subscribers. So if you find yourself enjoying my content, your subscription would be appreciated. So let's tackle this main news story first right from the beginning. Bloomberg put out an article last night. Nintendo has a shrewd plan for selling the Switch 2 in Japan. Shrewd. I'm not sure Nintendo would like to be described as having a shrewd plan. But continuing. We see here it's written by Takashi Mochizuki, published on June 1st, 2025 at 6 p.m. EDT. And here it reads, Nintendo Co. is making an unusual move with its Switch 2 distribution in Japan. It's saying the wholesale prices so retailers can earn more from each sale. Store operators will be able to make a gross margin of about 5% on each Switch 2 sold, higher than the informal industry standard of roughly 2%, according to people familiar with the plan. The decision will help bolster domestic retailers and ensure the new console is given prominent placement at outlets across the country, the people said. Asking not to be named as the information is private, shares of Nintendo fell as much as 2.2% in Tokyo on Monday. So here Bloomberg is saying from their own anonymous sources that Nintendo is doing something that is outside of the industry norm, and there is apparently an implication here that in part they are doing this because this will give more of a prominent placement in different outlets. They are doing this to have an advantage from an advertising perspective, so that way outlets showcase the Switch 2 more clearly, more broadly, more prominently. In my opinion, I think regardless of what this wholesale price and gross margin is, the Switch 2 will likely be featured prominently in any store outlet right now because it's the new thing. So I'm not so sure that would be why they would do this if they are doing this. But Nintendo has immediately responded to this report at 10 p.m., just a few short hours later, on June 2nd, 2025 Japan time. So yeah, there's a whole time zone issue here, but regardless, just a few short hours after this report came out, there were reports regarding the setting of the wholesale price for the sale of Nintendo Switch 2 in Japan. But the facts as described are not accurate. Please note that our company does not disclose transaction terms with distribution or sales companies. So, for extra clarity here, what I'm reading is a translation, right? What Nintendo actually posted in English officially is this. On June 22nd, 2025 JST, a news report related to the wholesale price of Nintendo Switch 2 in the Japanese market was published. We want to clarify that this report is not true. Nintendo does not disclose any information regarding business conditions with the distribution and retail partners. So they may seem very similar, but there is one key difference here, and that's that here they are saying outright in English, this report is not true. The translation says, but the facts as described are not accurate. Similar, but not quite the same. And so, what is going on actually? Well, I'll say this is not the first time Nintendo has fired back on a report about the Switch 2, and in the past, this was before the Switch 2 was officially announced, and so things were being reported by some venues such as Bloomberg, and perhaps not being portrayed in the accurate way Nintendo would want the world to know. And so, Bloomberg is saying some things here, and maybe there is truth in it. I think there likely is truth in it. I do not think Bloomberg would just make up information. I do think their sources have credibility, and they've been able to verify that to at least some extent. Of course, we kind of just have to trust them because these sources are anonymous, right? But that's why we go back to the whole credibility thing. Do we consider Bloomberg to be credible? So it really comes down to how much you trust the source here. But Bloomberg in general is considered to be credible. That does not mean they get everything right, though. There have been a lot of reports about Switch 2 over the years that have been inaccurate, that have not told the full picture. And so basically what Nintendo is saying, I think, that Bloomberg article does not tell the whole picture. There's more to this story, which Nintendo will not disclose because that's not the kind of thing they disclose. But at the very least, I'll say this story is very interesting, and I do think it's curious that Nintendo made sure to provide some clarity immediately, likely because they don't want people thinking certain things about how they're operating their business. But we have much more to discuss today, including a variety of Nintendo Today news updates here. So we have some new footage for Dragon Drive. As you see here from the gameplay I'm showing, it's Twitter compressed, so keep that in mind for all these Today updates. But we can see they're showing how you can steal a ball, and it looks like you have to get at them head on in order to do so when you run into them. If you do it from the sides or the back, it may not work. We have also gotten some gameplay footage of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet with its enhancement on Switch 2, and again, this is Twitter compressed so you can't see it in its full proper glory. However, the game's at a higher resolution and an improved frame rate of 60 frames per second. This is 60 FPS footage here, which is a pretty big deal for Pokemon. A solid 60, people were hoping for just a solid 30, so this is a big move and perhaps has implications for the future of Pokemon just running at a smooth 60 forevermore. Fingers crossed. But the most interesting footage to me today is this extra bit of gameplay we got from Mario Kart World. It's more binocular footage. And as you see here, there's a UFO flying around this area. I don't know what that is, but that's extremely interesting. I definitely want to check it out, get to it in some way, if that's even possible, which has me wondering, is it possible? Like, we look at all these lines here, can we race on these lines, get on top of the castle, maybe leap on top of the UFO? Might be a possibility considering the trick system in Mario Kart World. But even beyond that, I've noticed there's a lot of P-switches. There's one even inside the castle here, there's one over here, there's another one over here, there's another one over here. They're going to zoom in, so that's already 4 I've noticed. I think there's another one to the right as well. So yep, there it is. There's at least 5 P-switches in this area. I'm sure there are more that are more well hidden. And so I just see this, I see everything going on in the environment, I see that UFO, and I'm thinking, wow, this looks like a fun place to explore and mess around with. So I'm just excited to play Mario Kart World. This is all some very cool, interesting stuff. Moving on, we have an update on a story we talked about a few days ago on how the Switch 2 is not fully functional until a day 1 patch. And so here, it is said by Necrofelipe from Universal Nintendo, apparently getting the information from Neo Arcadia 7, it has been confirmed that the console does not require a patch to run Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive games or complete Nintendo Switch 2 Edition cartridges. The day 1 patch is only necessary for Switch 1 games and additional system functions. So some functionality is limited on the Switch 2, but you should still be able to play your Mario Kart World, your Breath of the Wild Switch 2 Edition cartridges on the console, regardless of whether you've gotten a patch or not. So we've talked about this before. It's been speculated this was the case. Now apparently it has been confirmed. Another interesting story that's going around is that apparently enhanced games from Microsoft Edge Game Assist, Xenoblade Chronicles X is listed there, and as Nashville talks about, this is likely an error, but Nintendo has been talking about PC possibilities or considering PC possibilities with the Switch 2, so there is this small remote possibility that maybe some Nintendo games may make their way to PC eventually, very similar to how Sony has been doing things over the last few years. Do I actually think this is going to happen? No, I think this is probably just an error. This is very different from the way Nintendo operates. Nintendo also is not in the same position as Sony. Software sales for Nintendo are far greater. They don't need the extra sales there. I think to them it's more important the exclusivity of their IP on just Nintendo platforms. That's one of their biggest sells, so I don't think they're going to do away with that by putting some PC games out there. Of course, if it happens, well, you know, it can happen and it wouldn't be the end of the world. I just don't think it's likely. On the note of Nash Weedle though, he also talks about here, Indiana Jones está de camino a Switch 2. La duda es si Microsoft usará game key cards para sus ports a Switch 2. So, Indiana Jones apparently coming to the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, Nash Weedle here is talking about how we are not sure if Microsoft is going to be using game key cards like most other third-party developers on Switch 2. Microsoft is a big company, a huge publisher, so what they do on Switch 2 is going to be an interesting situation. We haven't seen any games from them yet on Switch 2, so we're definitely waiting to see what's going to happen, but there's a lot of big games we think can come to Switch 2. Indiana Jones is one of them. On the note of game key cards or lack thereof, we have this new interview from IGN with CD Projekt Red, the makers of Cyberpunk 2077, and they talk about how easy it was to make this game, get this game running on Nintendo Switch 2. There are some really nice quotes here. For example, we really thought it was going to be more of a challenge, but in the end, it was not that much. Or down here they say, Cyberpunk is built for x86 with old PC architecture. So this from the beginning was completely different. Lots of changes had to be done at the engine level. All the shaders are in a different language. We had to convert everything. The Switch 2 uses a very, very different architecture. And so continuing here, they say, we have at least one core we share with the operating system. This was one of the struggles we had, but otherwise I think it was surprisingly fast to get the game running on the platform. We were all super impressed. And here they also say, with DLSS, it definitely increases the quality that you can have on the go and on the TV. That being said, the technology built scales very well across all the platforms. But they also say here, it was very difficult for the previous generation of consoles. I think I will say that the most difficult problem was the mechanical hard drive, which is one of those things that's very important not to have. The Switch 2 uses cartridges, it uses microSD Express. The reading and write speeds on the console are far greater than prior generation consoles. The Switch 2 also has a lot more RAM, and so this gives the Switch 2 a much better advantage over prior generation consoles, and the Switch 2 has the Phantom Liberty expansion. PlayStation 4 and Xbox One versions do not, for these reasons. And then also Switch 2 has DLSS as well. There's a variety of things that Switch 2 has that are really helping it here that put it above prior generation consoles. And so ultimately this entire interview is talking about how the Switch 2 is actually a very good platform for the game. It's far better than prior generation consoles. It allows them to realize the vision of the game, and it's a good version. So I am just loving all this information we keep hearing about the development of Cyberpunk on Switch 2. I already have my Switch 2 Cyberpunk version pre-ordered. I'm excited to give this game a go on the console. I think it's a fantastic version and it's a fantastic game, so I'm definitely looking forward to it. Moving on to some rumor stuff here. We have an update to the story that's been going around about the actress for Princess Zelda. So there's a story going around that Hunter Schafer is being considered for the role of Princess Zelda. Well, this source has been considered to be shaky, and that Park Place has provided an update on what's going on with this story here about who's being considered to play the role. Here it reads, industry sources push back on Hunter Schafer's Zelda casting. Following Rickman's post, that Park Place was contacted by a trusted third-party source with a history of accurate information and direct knowledge of activity around the Zelda movie. This individual reached out under the condition of anonymity, disputed the rumor outright, and provided the following detailed statement. Rickman's report, which states that Schafer is being eyed, misrepresents the situation by implying Nintendo's active interest, the source told us. In reality, the eyeing stems from Schafer's casting agents pitching to Nintendo, a common practice in Hollywood. So, I guess what's interesting here is that the initial report is misleading because it suggests that Sony and Nintendo and the parties involved have Hunter Schafer in priority here. And what's being made out here is that we do not know who's in priority here, who is in consideration. What's being suggested is that Hunter Schafer's agent is pushing for them to play the role, which is a common thing. This is something probably many are doing right now, because the role of Princess Zelda is going to be a very big deal role here. I'm sure for anyone who gets the role, it's going to be a huge achievement. And so basically, as we talked about the initial rumor, take this with a grain of salt. Now more so, take this with a grain of salt. We do not know, and even if you believe all this information fully, none of it clearly states who the actors will actually be. It's still up for debate. They may not have even chosen who's going to play the role yet. In the final story we'll discuss today, Nate the Hate just put out a podcast where he talked about how he has not heard about any Nintendo Directs happening in the immediate future. Now, for those who do not know, recently, PH Brazil said he heard that a Direct's supposed to happen in either the launch week of Switch 2 or the week afterwards, and Nintendo corroborated this information. So Nate the Hate is not corroborating this information. They are saying they haven't heard anything. Now, that doesn't guarantee that a Direct is not happening, but they haven't heard anything, and I will say that if Nate the Hate hasn't heard anything, it doesn't necessarily bode well. I will, however, add, though, that Nate the Hate had also told us that this year we would be seeing Kirby Planet Robobot, and that hasn't been announced yet, but there have been other Kirby offerings, so still very curious on what's going on there. And then, of course, there's also the long-rumored Fire Emblem remake. Where is that? Of course, as we've discussed with this Direct rumor, historically speaking, now that Nintendo's no longer beholden to E3, over the last 3 years, the Directs have been happening in the second half of June. So to expect it in the first half would be going against what Nintendo has been doing over these last few years. And when we account for the fact that the launch of Switch 2 itself is going to be a big deal, where there's going to be a lot of focus there, I am not sure it would make sense for there to be a Direct happening so soon. However, we did also talk about recently how it has been officially confirmed that Nintendo Switch 2 is an official partner of Summer Games Fest, which happens the weekend following the launch of Switch 2. So next weekend, June 6th, it all starts, where there's going to be a variety of announcements. And we may be seeing some significant announcements for Switch 2 during this period of time, so there's still going to be some exciting things we'll learn about the console and games coming to the console, but it probably won't be a Direct, and it may not be any big first-party Nintendo published titles. But could there be a Direct happening soon afterwards? I mean, I think the answer is yes, but how soon afterwards? Like a week later, 2 weeks later, a few weeks later? That part remains to be seen. Regardless, I think it's clear that there's still a lot more information we need to learn about Nintendo Switch 2 for the rest of the year. What we have now gets us to launch. But as for afterwards, I think at some point, relatively soon, Nintendo will need to give us a Direct. And I'll also add that there have been murmurings about a Direct, but it's been back and forth. It's not clear quite yet what is going to happen. But what do you all think? What do you make of all of this interesting Nintendo Switch 2 news? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.